The death of single-player games is quite a common catchphrase when it comes to internet gaming chatter at the moment. We're still seeing plenty of top-tier single-player titles that are selling really well, though. Is there a reason to be worried? My name's Mike Williams. This is Gareth Evans.
Yo.
So IGN's Alana Pierce has written a great piece on the topic of single-player games under the headline, "Developers say Twitch is hurting single-player games." She points out that the conversation about single-player being cannibalized by multiplayer games goes as far back as 2011, when PS4 lead architect Mark Cerny said this, quote, "Right now, you sit in your living room and you're playing a game by yourself. We call it the SP mission or the single-player campaign. In a world with Facebook, I just don't think that's going to last." Now, it shows that it's quite an old conversation that we've been having for a while. Yeah. But the article that Alana Pierce has written kind of speaks to some developers, right? And they've got some concerns specifically about like Let's Play culture and how that is hurting them, right?
Yeah, that's right. So Rami Ismail is one of them, and he's from Vlambeer. I've not heard of them before. But he said, quote, "One of the most under-discussed effects of Twitch, YouTube, Let's Play, the whole content creator ecosystem on the games industry is how the marketing impact of those platforms has affected what kind of games developers make." And he goes on to say, "Why would any major studio outside of a first party trying to sell consoles or a studio with a reputation for single player games bother with an immersive single player campaign?"
Right, so that's one of the developers that she's spoken to. She was speaking at E3. It was E3 this year that she was doing these kind of interviews, and that's where it's come from, where these indie developers are saying that Twitch and whatnot are really harming their revenue. Yeah. There was another one as well?
That's right, yeah. The Numinous Games, the studio behind That Dragon Cancer, wrote a blog post saying, "Let's Play culture seriously impacted their revenue," saying, quote, "For a short, relatively linear experience like ours for millions of viewers, Let's Play recordings of our content satisfy their interest and they never go on to interact with the game in a personal way that we intended for it to experience. If you compare the millions of views of the entirety of our game on YouTube to our sales as estimated on Steam Spy, you can hopefully see the disparity." I think specifically we have to make a distinction here that this game is a single-player narrative game, right? And there's very little gameplay in it. I don't know if you've seen it or
I've seen it actually, yeah.
And I feel like there is a distinction that has to be made here, because single-player games and single-player narrative games are two completely different. So a narrative game are the likes of things like Life is Strange, if you've played that, Firewatch, the Telltale games, where it's just like mainly focused around the story, right? And the story is the main attraction of the game. Now, if that story gets spoiled for you in any way, or if you watch a playthrough, then you might say that there's no incentive then to play the game because there's no gameplay outside of that. Yeah. So I think that's where he's coming from, is like the story gets ruined by people watching it. Yeah. And I can see that point. I can see that definitely. But single player games in general, that's another discussion for me.
Okay. Yeah. So that's an interesting point. So the fact that there are some games that are specifically designed as storytelling devices now, but you can get most of the nourishment from that, and most of like what you want from it from watching someone else play it as well. And that's what that specific problem is. But the argument being made is a kind of broader thing about single player and how that's getting kind of eroded. So let's look at that a little bit. So as Alana Pierce points out herself, for first party PS4 games, they are all big single player experiences and they still sell really well. So clearly there's a demand for it, right? People want to play like big games. God of War director Cory Balrog is one of the people who strongly agrees that single player is actually rocking it at the moment. God of War, of course, did really well earlier this year, the highest rated exclusive on the PS4. Sold more than 5 million copies in the first month. Yeah. That is about as successful as a game can get. And there's no multiplayer whatsoever in there. Yeah. Here's what Cory Balrog said on the topic of single player after the release of his game. Quote, "Single player games are the phoenix at this point. We go through the ebb and flow. I don't want to work on any games that don't have some kind of story component because that is the draw for me. Competition doesn't drive me. It's not to say that competition is bad. It's not to say that competitive games are bad, because I love that those exist, but it's not my thing." So he's a designer there saying, I love single player games. I love single player story games. I'm going to keep making them, basically. And that's kind of encouraging, right, as a single player games fan.
Oh, definitely, because there's enough talk in the media about how prominent multiplayer games are becoming and how everybody's squeezing multiplayer components into their traditionally single player experiences. So for a AAA developer like this who does produce these single player games and says he's committed and that's what he loves, it resonates really strongly with the people who feel like they're underrepresented in the community. People like myself, for example. So it's definitely good to hear.
Yeah, 100%. And like Horizon Zero Dawn is another example that sold really well, really highly rated, and that's again another first-party title that Sony is willing to put money into. But increasingly, the focus is on multiplayer. There's no question about that. Live games or even never-ending games. Now, this is an interesting point that Alan Pierce raised here. Games like No Man's Sky, Sea of Thieves, or Destiny, games which kind of grab the attention of content creators on YouTube and Twitch because they're like endless. They're endless fun. They're sandboxes. You jump in and there's always going to be new stuff. They're basically multiplayer games, or they are in some way infinite. Even if they're bare bones as hell at launch, which incidentally is the case in all three of those examples, No Man's Sky, Destiny, and Sea of Thieves, because you can just update it post-launch and you can keep it alive for a long time, and you'll have this community that markets it for you on Twitch and stuff. And that seems like a more appealing thing to do than really crafting and really bothering with a proper single player story kind of experience and having these character developments and stuff and like really good motion capture and stuff like that. It's worth pointing out that single player games can do really well at launch on Twitch and YouTube. God of War hit 300,000 viewers on Twitch in its first week. It's one of the most viewed games on YouTube. Thing is, it's still way behind older live or endless games like Fortnite and Minecraft. And now God of War is arguably the biggest AAA single-player game we've had in a while. So people just like watching multiplayer games, and that do you think that's the ultimate point, isn't it? Is people like watching them, people like streaming them. That's having a direct effect on the type of games that we're seeing. That's the argument here, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that is true, but the distinction is, what do people want to watch? Again, it's an important distinction to make here. Like, people are rewatching multiplayer games with various different outcomes can happen in the game, whereas a single player game, once you've seen God of War once, you don't want to rewatch that because you already know how the story plans out or whatever. But that's what people are watching, right? That's not what's necessarily what people are buying. And to say that there's a link between what people purchase and what people are watching, or how long people are watching, it would be a little bit of a stretch for me. But it's definitely the case. People watch games, multiplayer games for longer on Twitch. That is,
yeah, because you get this huge wave with God of War, and it comes in, and then like everyone wants to watch it for like the first couple of weeks. It's just dominating the thing, but it quickly dies off. We even saw that in our own personal experience, where there was a lot of excitement for God of War when it came out, and then it just peters out a little bit on Twitch, and you just move on to something else because it's done. You've played it, you finished it. Everyone's gone home and finished it themselves and whatever. So there's no bigger purveyor of live games and multiplayer games than Ubisoft, right? So since maybe The Division, they just love it. Like Watch Dogs, that had player invasions, that had people just coming into your open world and messing up your stuff. Rainbow Six Siege, big live game. For Honor is a multiplayer medieval combat game. Division 2 is coming up. Even Far Cry 5 has the endless Far Cry arcade with multiplayer and player-created maps. Skull and Bones is not just a pirate game, it's a multiplayer pirate game. Yeah. There was a headline on gamesindustry.biz last week that read, quote, "Even Assassin's Creed is a live service now." And this came from Ubisoft's Alan Core, who told us Assassin's Creed is a service-type product. Here's exactly what he said. "The idea with Odyssey is to create new content every week so that it's a lively adventure for the fans. So there's always something new, something fresh, and something they can discover and appreciate. We want this Odyssey to be living, to always be fresh. So it was a different way to create games this way." And Assassin's Creed is probably the biggest annual single-player franchise there is. It's a staple in the calendar, and it's a single-player game. Yeah. They've experimented with multiplayer in the past, but now it's a live service.
But that's funny you should use that, because Todd Howard recently at E3 mentioned that he believes Fallout 4 and Skyrim to be service-based games. And they're single-player experiences, single-player only experiences, right? But the service comes in where they're supporting, they're adding mods in the content creator store, whatever, and that's where the service side of it comes in. They're generating content after the fact, and it's not multiplayer at all. So
yeah, and now here's where I think the crux of the thing is. So this is a really interesting point that is brought up in the IGN article. A quote from industry analyst Michael Pachter for you. The problem is that as more people play the same games for longer, they necessarily buy fewer new games, and that's where the desire for more revenue arises. So that's where the Assassin's Creed thing comes up. That's because it lines up. It's a different approach to the multiplayer option, because as Michael Pachter says, apparently gamers are just sticking with their games for longer.
Yeah.
Now, to a degree, the industry wants that. The industry wants people to buy Assassin's Creed and keep playing Assassin's Creed. Everyone wants you to keep playing it. Ubisoft more than anyone, but you can see that with Far Cry, one of their most recent releases, because you can just keep theoretically playing it forever in Far Cry Arcade. That's what they want. Now, that is a different thing than multiplayer, but it still achieves the same result of keeping you in the game, keeping you spending money with microtransactions. And here's a line from Alana Pierce from her article. Adding in microtransactions or loot boxes basically alleviates the concerns surrounding gamers buying fewer games, because at that point, they want to just figure out how they can sell them loot boxes and microtransactions rather than selling them another game in 3 or 4 months' time. The conversation then is about they're in the game now, how do we make money out of that? Like, they've bought the game, how do we keep getting money out of them? And I think that's where the live service thing comes in and lines up with the multiplayer thing as like keeping people in the games.
I mean, obviously there's the industry is moving towards this because it generates additional revenue, or what they call it, additional opportunities for revenue for
cash.
So I mean, I feel like this is a little bit of a different conversation to Twitch harming single player games, but this is what we're discussing here is like the pros of having a multiplayer aspect in your game in any situation.
Yeah, but this is where it is though. Is it Twitch that is damaging the way the single player games are read and interpreted, or is it that companies just want different ways of making money now? Twitch is a part of that thing. If you make a multiplayer game that people keep playing, then they'll keep playing it on Twitch. People will buy into it. They'll buy into your ecosystem. Rainbow Six Siege, you can buy it for $11.99 because they just want you in the door.
Of course, yeah.
So you keep buying later on.
Yeah.
So I think this is a state of the industry kind of conversation that goes beyond the death of single player and more about how do you even define the games are such a mess of price points and business models and stuff. It's not like it was in like 2002 where it was just like 30, 40 quid at the end.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's an incentive for big developers to go after the cash. I mean, and this is the other side of it, right? It's like, single player games are dying because of Twitch. Well, maybe not. Maybe single players games are dying and there's not so much of them, or people aren't buying them so much because everyone in the industry, all the big publishers and developers, are pushing this. We need everyone to play multiplayer. We need them to be playing for longer.
Exactly.
And we need them to be spending money in our game for longer. And there's two separate things there, and to like link the two to say that it's single player games are dying because of Twitch is a bit of a stretch for me. And Alana's like line here, and I think I picked this one out because it didn't ring quite true to me. She says in an article, there's no doubt that Twitch streams and Let's Plays, which are free to watch, prevent some people from wanting to buy narrative-driven games.
Yeah.
I get that, right? Maybe that is true, but she's also ignoring the fact that there's no doubt that streams encourage people to buy games they never would have otherwise. She's not showing that side of the coin. Whereas, I mean, I know from experience that I've seen streams and been introduced to games and gone on to buy games and enjoyed games because I've seen them on Twitch and because I've seen Let's Plays of them on YouTube.
I think it's very difficult to quantify in the same way. It's a whole other topic, but it's in the same way that it's difficult to quantify how much piracy harms your game, because you can't necessarily assume that everyone who pirated it would have bought it.
Yeah.
If they hadn't pirated, it's the same type of thing.
Exactly, and it goes back to the what that Dragon Cancer blog said, because they said there's a disparity between the amount of views on YouTube and the amount of sales that we've got on the Steam thing. There's no evidence to say that the people who watch the stream of their game would have gone on to buy that anyway. And there's also no reason to believe that of all the people that watched the game, they also didn't go on to buy the game and play it themselves.
Yeah.
There's no stats or evidence for that. All that the devs see is like X amount of millions of people watched the stream, but only X amount of a very smaller amount of people went on to buy the game, and they feel like they're missing out.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the guy behind that Dragon Cancer is coming from, whereas he sees this as a narrative-driven game that gets spoilt by Let's Play, so people don't go on to buy. But I'm only aware of that game because of Jacksepticeye streaming it, and I was very close to actually buying that. I didn't have the time in the end. I was really contemplating buying that game, and I'm pretty sure that of the millions of people that watched Jacksepticeye stream, because there are millions of them, loads of them went on to buy buy it and play it and support the developer themselves. But that side of it isn't represented in this article, and that's what my bone of contention is.
I think there's two kind of premises. One is that you have to accept the premise that single player games are dying, and then the second one is that they're being killed by Twitch and YouTube. And I don't think either is true. I think, no. but I don't think single player is dying. You look at the ultimate point is this, right? Cyberpunk 2077, one of the most anticipated games on the release kind of schedule by miles. That's a single player game, and it might have multiplayer in the future. So it's this thing of there is single player, but multiplayer is in there somewhere. The same is true for the other, in my opinion, two biggest, most anticipated ones, Red Dead Redemption 2, which will definitely have online, and it's got the pre-order bonuses to back it up, and Last of Us Part 2, which again is another enormous single-player game with multiplayer. Single player isn't going anywhere. I think while Sony still is paying for first-party exclusives, they're not going to go anywhere. And while people are still buying Cyberpunk and Red Dead Redemption and The Last of Us Part 2 and playing the single player, even if COD is wiping the single player off its package, I think single player is not going anywhere. And I don't feel like the Twitch and YouTube and stuff is killing it any more than, if it is, then it's being balanced out by, as you said, it's how it's helping it as well. Yeah. It's being neutralized at the very
that's it. And even if it is affecting narrative-driven games, then it's on the developer to, I guess, to try and change the way they do things. You look at games like Detroit Become Human, non-linear narrative, right? You can finish that. There's so many different outcomes to that game. You could watch a stream. You can watch 5 or 10 different streams, and the whole game will play out differently. And that's a narrative-driven game with very little gameplay. So it's on the games industry to adapt to this. If a games developer does feel like this is Twitch and Let's Plays are affecting their games, then give me more choices matter, Mike. That's all I'm saying.
So it's a big, complicated topic. We've tried to cover as much of it as we possibly could there, but let us know what you think down in the comments below, and have a read of the Alana Pierce article on IGN, which we'll put a link to. It is a good article. There's a lot to read through that's interesting at the very least. Let us know what you think. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. There should be another video on your screens right now if you want to watch that, and a link to Patreon if you want to support the channel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.